Hi, I'm Marcin Kuśmierczyk. Welcome to Eastern Insights. Why does Eastern Europe's perspective on global affairs matter? Because here, history and geopolitics collide in ways that shape our world. Yet these voices often go unheard. This podcast bridges this gap. Each episode translates in-depth analysis from my Polish YouTube channel, Polityka Zagraniczna, which means international politics. For the last few years, this platform has dissected foreign policy, security, and the forces shaping Eastern Europe. Using AI tools like 11 Labs, we adapt these nuanced insights into English, preserving their depth while making them accessible to all. Whether we're unpacking Russia's latest moves, EU debates, or security challenges in Central Europe, our mission is simple: to foster informed dialogue by sharing Eastern Europe's untold stories. If you're curious about the world beyond headlines, subscribe now. Join me as we decode the complexities of global affairs, one Eastern European insight at a time.
Welcome back to the podcast. Today, let's talk about where Poland stands right now, on the big European stage. When it comes to shaping the security of our continent, Poland isn't exactly at the very center of the main discussions. You see, the Polish president, he's not consulting his American counterpart on regional policy matters. And while Poland holds the presidency of the Council of the European Union, and our Prime Minister is certainly active in European contacts, it just doesn't seem to be enough for Warsaw to become that real hub for discussing Europe's strategy regarding the war. That central role? It feels more like Paris holds it right now. And honestly, the fact that representatives from both major Polish political camps seem to be, let's say, on a sidetrack. It means nobody really benefits from talking about this publicly. It's not profitable for one side to accuse the other of being marginalized, because frankly, those same arguments could easily be turned right back around. So, where does that leave us? Are we simply seeing Poland settle into its final position in this geopolitical game? As a country that mostly receives solutions imposed by the Western powers? Or maybe it's actually a good thing? Maybe it's better that we don't legitimize our presence with political solutions we see as temporary, maybe even doomed to fail. But above all, is Poland worth more? Remember back in November last year? A presidential minister mentioned that a meeting between President Duda and President Trump would happen this year. Well, it did eventually happen, at the end of February. And seeing the head of the Polish state waiting for several dozen minutes, for a late former U.S. president, just for a 10-minute conversation? Let's be honest, it's probably not going to be remembered as one of the most glorious moments of Andrzej Duda's presidency. After that, there was talk that President Trump might even come to Poland during the Three Seas Initiative Summit. But that didn't pan out. And today, that same presidential minister is saying a Trump visit to Poland is highly likely. But even if Trump does come to Poland, and the country is swept up in a moment of euphoria, and the media goes on and on about the thickness of the bulletproof windows on the amazing presidential limousine, it doesn't change the fundamental fact. Poland isn't being consulted at the highest level by a partner we constantly boast sees us as an absolutely key, essential ally. Think about it. The Italian Prime Minister, the President of France, the Prime Ministers of Ireland or Norway. They've already been hosted at the White House. And this isn't about being envious. It's not about coveting that amazing peak of meeting the contemporary emperor. It's about highlighting a very simple truth. Americans are simply not consulting with Poland on their policies regarding our region of Europe. Poland just doesn't have significant influence on U.S. policy when it comes to the war. Now, let's look at the Polish presidency in the Council of the European Union. It's entering a crucial phase. It's too early for a full summary, as many important processes are still in motion. The battle over the shape of European programs designed to stimulate the defense industry? That's still ongoing. And in the broadest sense, this is a formal and legal fight about a couple of things. To what extent will European defense programs truly be about building rapid capabilities, providing broad access to financing for the countries that need security the most right now? And to what extent will it really be protectionist policy, dressed up in military language? Policy aimed at getting a financial boost and removing competition for the Western defense industry? But beyond the formal role, beyond holding councils and co-creating legislative processes, which, while important, are often not very spectacular, the presidency also offers very significant political tools. It goes beyond the formal framework. It gives a pretext to signal something to Europe, to, in a way, coordinate European policy. Nobody formally gave Viktor Orban the right to speak on behalf of Europe with world leaders during Hungary's EU presidency, which finished just before Poland's. But Orban did exactly that. He used the presidency to build his country's political standing. Here in Poland, as you might expect, there's a lot of rhetoric. We are a leading force in Europe. We're back at the table with the big players. You have to count on Poland again. Europe speaks in Polish. Of course, we hear a lot of this in Polish public life, but it's hard to point to truly significant concrete examples on the ground. There's just no doubt about it. The center that's dictating, or at least coordinating, European policy regarding the war, regarding the United States, that center is not Warsaw today. Even with Poland holding the EU presidency, that capital is definitely Paris. France is playing that role today, and you can't really defend the lack of a truly spectacular European summit in Warsaw or somewhere in Poland, one with significant symbolism, perhaps tied to the millennium of Bolesław Chrobrzy's coronation. When it comes to the results of the formal legal process during the presidency, it's still too early to judge definitively. Those processes are ongoing. But when we look at political leadership, political sound, this presidency in the Council of the European Union is unfolding without much echo. We aren't sending a clear message to Europe that we can provide real political leadership, not just declarations and slogans. Now, I really don't want this episode to come across as simple complaining, as just taking potshots at politicians, saying they're doing nothing, they're useless, they should all be replaced. That's not my point at all. It's not that Polish politics isn't working, or that Poland doesn't matter at all. Poland is an important player in this situation. But we are, after all, an actor in the background. Look, from the government's very efficiently managed policy of building a Nordic-Baltic bloc, to the 3Cs Initiative Summit, which we'll talk about in a separate episode soon, organized, of course, by the presidential camp. There are many aspects of Polish foreign policy that can be praised. It's not that Poland is a completely negligible factor in this history, but if I had to sum up the last few months with a single image, showing the security architecture of our part of Europe and how Western policy towards Russia and Ukraine is developing, I think that image would show the Americans, the French, and the British talking to the Ukrainians, the old Western powers, talking about the approach to the war after over 20 years, 21 years, since Poland joined the European Union. Poland, the largest country in the region that is already part of the Western world's institutions, is an important factor in this history, yes, but, ultimately, a secondary factor. Now, at this point, an argument that's been present in the Polish public debate since at least 2014 always comes up, and it seems like a really strong one. Back when the Normandy format existed, that's Germany, France, Ukraine, and Russia, the format that led to the Minsk agreements, or rather, disagreements, you could hear a similar complaint in Poland. People said, "We should be in that group. We should be among the countries co-shaping security policy in our region of Europe. We're a representative of the Western world. We're in its institutions, but we're from this region." Back then, aside from the fact that, well, nobody actually invited us to that group, the main argument against it was, we don't want to legitimize those kinds of solutions. We all know what the Minsk agreements were. We all see how they ended. And today, aside from the fact that, again, nobody is inviting us into the group of decision makers shaping the West's policy regarding the war, You can also argue that all these solutions, proposals, slogans, meetings, they're just writing on sand. That nothing concrete will come of them. That there are no permanent proposals worth investing political capital in. And this is seemingly quite a strong argument, if it weren't for the first part, the fact that nobody is inviting us. Meaning, Poland's absence from this or that group isn't a result of our assessment of the situation, not because of our decision on the topic. It's simply because, first, we aren't invited, and second, we don't have the ability to force our way into these kinds of groups. Here, by the way, I'd like to briefly mention that it's very likely Poland will soon face a significant political dilemma concerning our policy on isolating Russia. It seems quite obvious that keeping Russia in political and economic isolation for as long as possible is in Poland's interest, as part of the West. But whether Russia stays in such isolation doesn't actually depend on us. And the Americans? They're already starting to break that cordon. What if Russia is no longer kept in that isolation? That's a question for a completely separate episode, something we'll definitely tackle in the future. Today, I want to think about how we should approach this situation, how we should assess it, how we should feel about it. The fact that something so crucial to our vital interests, arguably even more so than for many other Western countries, something that concerns our security frontiers, our political and economic future, is being played out, perhaps with Poland participating, but with Poland in a background role. What should we do about this? How should we feel about this? One option on the table, one that shouldn't be dismissed out of hand, is to appreciate the role Poland does play today, and in some way, at least temporarily, accept it. Because the status of a semi-peripheral state, but one that is connected to a political and economic system that offers a relatively large dose of self-determination, a field for self-expression, and an economic perspective, a path to prosperity. That is still something much, much better than the boldest dreams of many past generations of Poles. We do need to appreciate this. We need to appreciate the place where we are, but here, we need to make a very, very important distinction. Because accepting Poland's current status in the game of our security and future as something temporal, something that gives us time, perhaps the last moments of favorable geopolitical weather, to build tools to be even more independent, to have even better, more effective tools for shaping the economic and security policy around our borders. That's one thing. And something else entirely is hoping that if we just stick to the system that has given Poland such great decades of economic growth, if we just remain sufficiently strongly connected to the system, that will be enough to at least maintain security. Because in that second scenario, our future depends entirely on the continuation of a system whose future is far from certain. A system we can say with absolute certainty today will not remain unchanged. It will evolve. The fact that we now have an entire generation of Poles born and raised in a free Poland, the fact that society has experienced uninterrupted economic growth and improved living standards, the fact that in the first months of the war, we saw that the Polish state can be effective, it can influence the course of events, the fact that there are fewer and fewer people in Poland who don't have such ambitions, along with Poland's historical, economic, and geographical context. All of this makes it quite obvious. We must at least try. The social sentiment clearly shows we must try to build a state that is truly serious, a state that is truly capable of creating European policy, a state truly capable of guaranteeing the well-being and security of its citizens. And politicians feel this. Today, you can't win elections without acknowledging and responding to this social emotion, this desire for a more ambitious policy. Prime Minister Donald Tusk, during a recent speech, presented his Piast doctrine, based on having the strongest army and the largest economy in the region. But I was even more struck by something he said a few days earlier, when he outlined his government's economic policy. He said the era of globalization, of Belarusian globalization, is over. He said, capital has nationality, and that it's time to repolonize the economy. He stated his government would be guided by economic nationalism. He put it this way: "The world teaches us today, and we must draw conclusions from it. Capital has nationality. The economy has nationality. The manager of a company, managed or co-managed by the state, has nationality. Our interests have white-red colors. Someone will call it economic nationalism. I have no problem with that. Now, it's one thing when someone on the right side of the political scene says this. But when Donald Tusk, the embodiment of Polish liberalism, announces that his government will be guided by economic nationalism, that's different. Of course, you can always doubt the credibility of these words. Say they're just words. Wonder how much this rhetoric is tied to the ongoing election campaign. But even if we take the most cynical view of this speech, which, by the way, is worth listening to, especially for voters of the civic platform, because for Donald Tusk himself, just a few years ago, it would have been economic heresy. But even if we assume the most cynical interpretation, that it's just meant to calm some social, electoral emotion, it still proves that this social emotion is real, that it's pushing the state towards a certain kind of policy, or at least a certain kind of rhetoric. But for me, this is something much bigger. This is proof of how powerful global economic trends are breaking through current thinking patterns. Because many months ago, I told you here that the structure of the world economy was heading towards growing nationalism. Symptoms of this included how states behaved during the pandemic, how we emerged from lockdown, what kind of state aid existed within the EU framework, when we saw the first green, ecological waves of economic protectionism. Back then, these ideas still seemed a bit cutting edge. Today, it seems almost nobody has any doubts about it. So, we have this tension, growing ambitions, slogans about a great army, a powerful economy, a leading role in Europe, and then the reality. A reality where Poland is not an insignificant country, but it is a secondary country in the game of our region, a country where the army is still under construction. And economically, for Poles, building a nuclear power plant, something that's been discussed for decades, feels like a task on the scale of flying to Venus and back. This significant tension between what Poland could be, what we wish it could be, and what it is today, this can lead to many undesirable outcomes. It can deepen frustrations. Many of you, dear viewers, and I know many of you are young people, many of you will likely feel disappointed by Poland. But in this beautiful month of May, I want to make a small appeal to you. Please don't lose your spirit, because the fight to create a community and a state capable of guaranteeing its citizens effective state institutions, security, and the prospect of prosperity. That's not a fight that ends. It's not something lost or won once and for all. It's a constant struggle. Our history proves that this matter is never totally lost. And today, our starting position, compared to past centuries, is truly excellent. A lot will depend on how you channel this potential disappointment. How will you use it? Because it's probable that in the coming months, maybe years, you will feel a significant lack of satisfaction. A lack of satisfaction with Poland's international position, with Poland's economic policy, with Poland's domestic policy. And I hope, I wish, that this disappointment won't turn into bitterness, but into action. Even the simplest action, even the smallest, even the most microscopic action. Something that, in some way, builds the state you would like to live in. And then it really won't be so bad. Thank you very much for listening. Because, you know, is Poland worth more? Of course it is. See you next time.